And that's if you're outside early. It's windy, sunny, and rainy outside.
Today.
In Lawrence, it was like an hour ago.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm like walking into the house and it's like it started raining.
No.
The sun was out and the wind was blowing all crazy.
they said they're supposed to get.
And then it was like 10 minutes later, it was all really comfortable.
Because they knew you were outside, I suppose.
It was weird.
I think.
Definitely weird.
Yeah. Yeah. No YouTube thing or Facebook.
It's interesting.
Okay. So, yeah. I don't know who else needs. I'm sorry.
How are you doing?
Doing well.
Well, I think we wanted to do some Q&A about the notice letters first. Although actually, I don't have any questions about yours. It was pretty brief. We would love to take your questions.
You want to just walk through it and then just kind of give us your brief overview and some explanation.
Can I present it to you?
Formally now.
Okay, sure, we can talk about it. So on compensation, we have a few different items. A couple of them are the standard step and column movement and additional increase to the base. We kind of talk about those every year, I think. And then we do want to do something about our folks who are at the end of the salary schedule. So we're hearing from members of our bargaining unit that several of them are maxed out on the salary schedule. We have nowhere to go. And so I think we suggest a couple different ways that we could approach that in the notice letter. And then some kind of reorganization of the supplemental pay schedule. We imagine you have questions about that. We do too.
Okay.
So that is a monster undertaking. We understand it's one that might take time and lots of input. We've been gathering a lot of that input, but as far as an actual full proposal, we don't have that for you yet. As you can imagine, it takes a long time.
Just real quickly on that, are you looking to like add positions? Are you looking to adjust like level set like positions? Are you looking like for a general bump in the percentage pay? Or what was
I
kind
think
of
the second thing you said is the closest thing
Okay.
to what we're thinking. What we're finding is that a lot of members of our bargaining unit are saying to us, we can't understand the rhyme or reason behind why different supplementals are paid the way they are, or what formula is responsible for that, or what that organization looks like, who decides. A lot of the amounts just haven't been reviewed in a long time. And then there are some basic things like the names of certain positions they don't correspond with the actual thing we call that position. So there are some just clerical things like that. But I think that word reorganization is probably the most accurate way to describe what we want to do. We're not looking for a wholesale increase to supplementals, although we imagine some of them would increase. We would obviously not advocate for a decrease to anybody's supplemental.
I would like to add, I mean, the overall is the structure, but there's a couple of things that we thought were maybe missing. Like there might be one or two on the top and end of what you just mentioned. It's not super extensive, but we did notice a couple of positions that maybe aren't listed, that people aren't doing work currently.
And currently they're doing extra duty work.
Be like our band, our elementary band teacher. Right now is not on the extra duty schedule or the supplemental contract schedule at all. And that's totally, all of that work is before or after school.
It's outside the contract day for sure.
Yeah, so it's not, we're not looking to add like 20 positions or anything, but maybe one or two with a majority falling in that middle of just reorganization.
Sure, thank you.
And oftentimes, both parties end up with the bones of what some other people did years ago, and once it's on there, nobody ever really revisits it.
So Jack could probably speak to that. 'cause
Yeah,
he's been in
so like
charge
I
of it.
asked several people about how they're formulated, and no one knows. Like honestly, no one knows how people come up with those numbers. And most, like, I asked Kara about it, she was just like, what's always been that? I'm like, but what's it based off of? She goes, well, I don't know. So it's just kind of that, we're like, okay. And I don't know, have you ever looked at the actual supplemental thing? You can't really look at it very well. You can't really do anything to it except for, when you ask people like, why is this here? Why is this here? No one really knows why. Like there's no why it's there or why they figured it out. So they said, oh, it just seems logical to put it there. Like they could never answer the why of how they came up with the numbers.
Which of course doesn't mean there isn't one, or that's.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that
doesn't
they're
belong
wrong. It's
right.
just like when you go to ask, like, how did you come up with that? There's like, oh, we thought this was the same. And just like, but how'd they come up with that? Oh, I don't know. It's just always been that. Like she literally said, she's like, it's just always been that way. I don't really know.
So
So-
are you going to bring us some sort of new framework to look at?
Well,
Yes.
it's in progress. There's lots of data to be gathered and compared, and so they've been working on that process. Okay. So we do want to negotiate about the defined benefit again. We did talk about this last year and we understood the board said, hey, we don't really want to take on the variable cost of like, we're always going to pay for this policy no matter what. So we're willing to negotiate that in a different way, maybe just for the specific amount that it's going to cost for that policy option for the coming year. We can renegotiate it from year to year if necessary. But we think there are other options contract-wise that maybe we could get our employees access to that lower deductible option through their benefit. So we do want to negotiate that again.
So this would be different wording than last year, correct, when it talks about my understanding is that, we talked about the single premium low deductible PPO.
Right, so I know last year we asked you for language that just said, you'll always cover that. You can understand why the board would want to take that on permanently because you never know how much that's going to cost. But at least for the coming contract year, we would like to negotiate that amount, which our numbers I haven't seen yet. I don't know yet. Yeah, they haven't started at all.
We're still
But
waiting.
I've, yeah,
Still waiting
received
on-
an email from Heather.
We're still waiting on that. I know Aetna's first initial one was a little high, and so then reached out about the idea of, okay, well, we're gonna go and put that back out there, and I think their second one was better. I know the committee's planning on meeting later, I think later in the month of June, I think.
And then we have a couple items there on the end that are really about, one is about teacher representation, which we already have in the contract. In the context of disciplinary meetings, teachers can ask for representation. And you can kind of see the terms there. We would just like to apply that to any meeting in which an employee would request to have representation. This is not because we think that's gonna happen all the time, every day. But just for a couple reasons. One is that I think for employees, something that we hear is that those meetings can be uncomfortable or they're not always sure how to respond, or they feel that they just need some support in those contexts. But for others, I think just knowing that that support is available to them is helpful. A third party in any conversation can make things a little bit more bearable for people or be an aid to professionalism. And this is kind of just in response to a few different things we've heard from members of our bargaining unit. And I don't know how often that policy is used now in the disciplinary context. Hopefully we're not in the disciplinary context that often, so I'm not sure, but.
I can't imagine, I don't know that we had anything last year that would require someone needing require asking for an additional representative. So, one of the questions I had on this, because of the open-ended nature of it, which it is what it is, the question, the hang-up that I believe I have at least is a formal and informal investigation. Just on the wording of that.
Okay, could you give me more words about?
Yeah, just, I guess the thought that I have visited with, at least the administrative team, is concerned that can turn what is a simple conversation into what we would think would be already going to both sides of the spectrum or adversarial. So not that anybody wants to turn it that way, but just a simple discussion can turn that way. And obviously, that's always in the eye of the beholder. But what could be a simple question could then turn adversarial. And so that's the informal, obviously the formal investigation is very laid out, but the informal kind of opens itself up to whoever's the eye of the beholder on that.
That probably also applies to whether something is an investigation at all, or whether it's formal or informal, right? So I guess, I don't know, what would you like to be precluded from the policy language? Like, what do you think should not be included?
Can I ask, maybe you just saying that this kind of stems from maybe a couple of instances recently or in the last year or two, where there were those meetings where maybe they weren't prepared or did not respond. Were these meetings with just like staff and administrator? Was it with parents? Would it have been like evaluations? Like what types of meetings are we talking about here where they feel that there's the thought of needing a third party in the room? I mean, I know this kind of lays out like it's open to all instances. Anytime it is me and an administrator, I want the right to that person. But is this stemming from like evaluations when it was just one-on-one type of situations, or do we know what?
There's not like one specific type of meeting that it comes from. It's not as if there's been like, you know, one giant incident that caused all of this. Is just kind of feedback we've heard from different people in our bargaining unit, that essentially they want another layer of just like presence in meetings with them sometimes. And I also want to say, I think that this is probably something that happens informally often as it is. I'm sure there are many times where licensed employees say like, you know, can I have my mentor with me in this meeting, or can I bring my colleague with me? And certainly, I think we have administrators in this district who are probably pretty agreeable to that. I think this is probably codifying something that's available to us in most instances anyway. But if it's not in the contract, then employees don't know that they have that right necessarily. So we would like them to both have it and know that it exists for them.
The only other question I could see, because it is in there wording wise, is with the conference with parents, both formal and conference with parents could be a student records issue. Apparently, if I'm sitting in a meeting with a teacher and there's another teacher in there and we're discussing my students' grades, my students' behavior, and things of a records or privacy nature, then there's another teacher there that may not be a teacher of the student. That can certainly make parents feel uncomfortable as well.
Okay, I hear that. Moving to committees then, if we're done talking about it. We have a little trouble working out language for this because basically what we want is there to be transparency about committees as they relate to negotiated items. Like, how are those committees composed? Are they all composed the same way? What is their decision-making process? For instance, at what point does a vote happen to make a decision, and what percentage of people have to vote in favor or against? How many people from whatever categories are on those committees? This is information that people in our bargaining unit have just expressed like confusion about, and we can't actually explain that always either. Even if we have representatives on that committee, we don't always know the ins and outs of how they work. So that's essentially what that language is about. And that would be why it is worded to say either they all need to be operated the same way, which seems maybe difficult to achieve, or we just need to be able to know for each committee involving negotiated items? How are they proposed? How are decisions made? What's the timeline like, et cetera?
The only question I had on that with committee composition, is the definition of a committee, and I assume just for negotiated items. So right now, the biggest one we have will be the health committee. And I don't know that when that's formed, I know that EDA has representation on there, but I don't know if it's, and you may be more familiar with that. I don't know what the makeup of that is.
We came up with, when we look at it, it's actually called the benefits committee or the benefits group. Because we do have like a health and wellness committee now that meets to try to come up with plans or incentives for employees' health and wellness, like the wellness sessions after school or competitions and things like that. So I think part of it is making sure that we understand that, hey, like benefits committee, this is a negotiated item. Health and Wellness Committee doesn't make decisions on that happen within the Benefits Committee. That is, and sometimes I've found that those two things are getting confused by staff members. Well, the Health and Wellness Committee already met, and this is, I'm like, no, that is not the committee that's making this overall decision.
Sure.
And so I think the purpose of this language is to help clarify that, hey, these are the things that are mandatory and negotiated in our benefits and compensation. So if or when we have this committee, this is what it means as it relates to our negotiations and to our certified staff.
And that is a confusing item, I totally understand, because the wellness committee meets, at least quarterly, and then the benefits committee meets to make the decision.
Like in the
What's the
summer.
current makeup of the benefits committee? Is it
Teacher representation or certified staff representation is 3. We have 3 teachers that usually represent, and then last summer there was someone from like each department. So like someone from transportation, someone from food services.
Would part of any discussion on this topic say that those certified members would need to be a certain percentage of NEA representation, or just any certified staff member?
I don't think we're looking to necessarily dictate what the composition is. I would like to know what it is first, and then I would have an easier time telling you. But the goal isn't necessarily to increase representation from the association as much as it is just to create transparency about how that composition happens.
A lot of it is who's on the committee.
Right.
You don't know. No one knows. There's a lot of times where you're like, we have like our in-service days and they're like, have this committee stand up. And they don't even, they're like, people in charge were like, oh yeah, I didn't know they were on the committee. So it's just kind of like getting that helps, that would help the transparency of knowing who's on the committee.
And you can probably help me with history. Was that a formed standing committee for benefits? The benefits committee was a formed committee by that? Or is it just something that kind of became best practices and that's what that's?
I think
Okay.
it's maybe, it's been a long time. Kim Lancaster served on the benefits committee for certified staff for quite a few years in that representation.
And Bonnie Nice did, and then when I
Yeah.
took her job, I automatically became that person. I'm the worst person to be on insurance. I'm from a different country, you don't even do it like this. Maybe that's a good person to have. I was like, I don't get any of this, so, that was a good thing, but I inherited that role by taking that position, so I was like, I don't know if I was selected or.
So,
Yeah.
I think we're
so
just,
maybe it
like,
was even more.
we can vote, the benefits is kind of one that always stands out every summer because it's so prominent and it's a major part of decision making. But just how, as a district, are we going to compose our committees?
Yeah.
And especially
Some kind of
those,
standard.
yeah, and then, and especially those items that affect negotiated items.
So I would certainly agree, that would be great to have something wording wise, this is the composition of that, so that in the negotiated agreement, everybody is very clear about it. I don't think that'd be an argument at all. If you wouldn't mind, between now and the next meeting, I can visit with Amy, our HR, and see what, what our best practices, what would the formation of that committee look like, and then bring that back, so something could be codified, because, yeah, I agree, I think it's probably something that stemmed from, here's what we were doing, let's
Back to the supplemental contract.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
No one
knows.
We've always done it that way, we don't know.
Just kinda happens.
So you might bring some suggestions. and
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful, for sure. Thank you. I think I've reached the end of my informal presentation as a legislator, but if you have more questions about it, I definitely want to answer those.
Just wanted, it's probably more of my misunderstanding than anything else. You labeled both of those as permissive items instead of mandatory. Is that just because they don't directly affect the P&A, or is it?
Because you don't have to negotiate them.
Okay. But that, I wanted to double check that for the board team's reference as well, so,
I
okay.
appreciate that you're willing to negotiate those.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I had a couple other things on our agenda. One is about money and the other one's about scheduling, so which one do you want to talk about?
Let's do money.
Right,
The easy one, right?
yeah, calendars are a whole other thing. Did the board have a chance to review the KSDE, the new money estimates? I didn't mention about those last week.
Please go.
Oh, I just want to ask if you think that they're accurate as far as working numbers.
So, and I double check this again, with both KSD, that is what we believe will be our new monies is accurate. The discussion is with the line item veto, what will happen when that goes to the Attorney General? For Eudora, it will be a shift, but not a very seismic shift. Depending, that could be either a very prolonged court battle or not a very long court battle. But regardless of that, if it were to be ruled that her line item veto was not legal, it would just rescind to what was passed as law. So, we're not talking about a significant drop one way or another, and it would not call for an open March sittings. It would not call for the legislator to come back and reconvene to pass new laws. So it would just fall that way. So it would affect Eudora, but not a significant amount. So.
Okay, I think I only understood half of what you just said, but I'm pretty much with you. If you want to give it another go.
So perfect example for Eudora is it's about $50,000. If the governor's veto stands, it's an extra $50,000 because it goes back to our third year. If it does not stand, if it's ruled as not constitutional by the AG, then it would be a loss of $50,000 in money, but not a huge significant. We're not talking about what some of the rural school states fit.
Okay, so what is the board's projected amount for the new money for the LOB?
For the LOB, it will be dependent on what we can set. Our LOB right now, we have the maximum raising of 33%. Right now, I think as far as mills wise, 33 mills right now, we usually pull about 9. So between that, it's all usually based on what we can get on our student projection enrollments for budget.
Our projected enrollment is down.
Our projected enrollment will be up, we believe, this year a little bit.
Oh,
We
I think
haven't
so.
started that yet until we roll over, only because we graduated a smaller class this year compared to our larger class. But that will be this year's money. Right now, we're projected to see an increase of state aid and state funds.
That's about it.
Dates.
Oh, yeah, dates. I don't want, can you tell I don't want to talk about the schedule? Like, putting that off. Could we schedule our remaining meetings, or give it a shot?
Please.
Because I know that's gonna be a huge mess.
I'm gonna step away from the table to grab my phone, because I'm
Yeah.
gonna need that.
I agree, so I have my phone.
We do know that that Stu is out all next week. So next week.
I think-
Go ahead a little bit.
We might be looking at late June for the
Okay.
next one, because we've got national tournament and all the things.
Yeah.
I guess we should let him get back before we. We're like, hey, we decided, here's my second.
Are you thinking like, at least like the week of like the 26th?
I think I was thinking the 19th, the week of the 19th.
Before that, yeah.
The week, yeah, the week of the 19th.
When's the national? When's the-
FBLA, I had some kids get close, but so we're not.
My granddaughter is going.
We're looking more forward to next summer.
Where's next summer that?
Orlando,
Oh, yeah, this one's in Atlanta.
yeah.
Do you need a assistant?
I do have one. I do have an assistant, remember? So there, I had some close ones, and then I think with a little bit more work, I have some kids that are gonna probably like pretty be hit on with it. So it's usually that last week of, like up to July 2nd.
Yeah, I think this
Which grandchild still?
one. Grace's daughter, Mia,
Oh,
she's a freshman,
okay.
she's going in the planning,
Event planning.
event planning.
She's a freshman, they need to stop. They're growing fast.
Yeah, well. Okay.
So the week of June 19th, what does availability look like for us?
We think about this time, like 4:30ish or?
I would
June 25th?
prefer like maybe the 20th or the 21st, not the back half of that.
Right, 21st would be better for me.
I can make either take work.
Okay.
So June
21st at 4:30.
I mean, we can do
Come on.
20.
It's my birthday.
Oh. Is that your birthday?
That's your actual-
Come on.
Yes.
Shove my cake.
So the
Yeah, Chef
20th?
Nicky.
Is it because you don't want us to sing?
Well, you just never know what I might have planned that day.
I can set up a grill out front, dinner.
Oh, you're getting closer.
So the 20th at 4:30?
Yeah.
Okay. Could we schedule at least one more? You know, I would love to be optimistic and think we're gonna get this all done next meeting, but
What, is there anything that would just delay it? I mean, it would just be maybe insurance. So do we feel like by the end of June, we would have all of our financial numbers?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so maybe the following week?
I think I can do anything the 9th, the week of the 9th or later in July. Because I'm not,
Yeah, she's
I'm in Orlando the 2nd and 1st, and I don't know.
They're talking the week
They're
after,
talking
the week
26th.
after, like the 27th.
Oh.
27th of June.
You're in a big hurry. Let's see, I could do the 26th, 27th, or 28th that week, the 29th.
Do-
I would almost.
I can't do
I can't.
Well, I think that's what we talked.
28th would be ideal for me.
I do.
28th works.
28th.
Well, and it's hard to know what we might need to rework in between sessions. I think if,
I know.
I'd be more comfortable going the week of the 9th in July.
10th.
10th, yeah.
Maybe the 10th, 11th, or 12th.
I can do the 12th.
Yeah, I can do 12.
12th.
Or but you're okay.
You've got-
We can always see how close we get to the next meeting to determine the timeliness of that. So what time, what
Oh.
we turn around.
I'm sorry, I'm not free on the 12th.
You're not?
No. I'm sorry, but I can do the 11th or 13th. Or 10.
Or we do.
Well, I am free all of July, because I have cut my schedule down this summer.
And the 13th, we have school.
Okay,
So
that's fair.
And that's important.
Maybe the 11th?
Okay.
Four-thirty for you, and that's
Yeah.
kind of close to your dinner time.
Oh. Not even wait till the birthday. Okay, so 4:30 on the 11th is the next one. Sounds good.
It's been a while since I've taken a shot, so that's true.
Well, thank you. So, did you have anything else?
I think we're good.
got a little homework.
I had to say that calendar thing was pretty easy reading.
Actually,
I think you've all been on emails that have been like, I can do this, I can do that.
You sit there, I was like, good to see ya.
Well, also.